Some people's life paths are tragic from the very beginning, depriving them of even the basic things that most take for granted. Such was the fate of Amber Gibson, a resident of South Lanarkshire, Scotland, who was born into a family dominated by violence and profound poverty. Amber's family environment was shaped by social dysfunction. Her parents, Peter and Marie Gibson, lived with their 2 children, older son Connor and younger daughter Amber, in a depressed working-class district. The family's financial situation was characterized by extreme hardship. Their only source of income was social welfare, as the father adamantly avoided employment, preferring alcohol instead. The dominant figure in the family was Peter Gibson, an individual with pronounced sadistic tendencies. His terroristic behavior toward family members created an atmosphere of constant fear and tension. His wife and Marie and older son Connor were subjected to particularly cruel treatment. Systematic beatings of the mother occurred in front of the children, causing deep psychological trauma. The situation reached a critical point when Marie, fearing for her life, turned to law enforcement. During the investigation, Peter continued to demonstratively threaten his wife, which became additional evidence of his aggressive nature in the court proceedings. The criminal investigation revealed shocking facts about Peter Gibson's illegal activities during 2001 to 2008. Among the crimes he was charged with was a particularly brutal attack on a young child, whom he severely injured without any rational reason. The investigation also established the fact of sexual violence against a woman whom he tied up and attempted to strangle. The victim testified that she was on the verge of death when the attacker suddenly stopped his actions. For the totality of proven crimes, including systematic domestic violence, Peter Gibson was sentenced to imprisonment. His criminal case became a stark example of how an individual with uncontrolled outbursts of aggression poses a serious threat to society. For the totality of committed crimes, the court sentenced Peter Gibson to 10 years imprisonment. The children's prolonged exposure to a toxic environment dominated by violence left a profound mark on their psyche. The older son Connor was especially affected by the destructive influence, having been the target of systematic physical and psychological abuse from his father since birth. It seemed that Peter's imprisonment in 2008 should have brought relief to the family. At that time, Connor was 5 years old, and Amber was 3. However, the situation was complicated by the fact that Marie, freed from her husband's tyranny, fell into deep depression and effectively withdrew from raising the children. Under these circumstances, social services made the decision to place the children under the guardianship of Craig and Carol Niven, a married couple. They were a childless couple who had long dreamed of parenthood and sincerely cared about the fate of the children who had endured so much suffering in their own family. The guardianship process was accompanied by opposition from the biological grandparents, who groundlessly accused the Nivens of having ulterior motives, suggesting they were only interested in receiving state benefits for the children's care. However, their objections did not affect the final custody decision. After moving to the Scottish town of Hamilton, Amber proved to be a cheerful, kind child with exceptional abilities. Despite the traumatic experiences of early childhood, she maintained a bright perception of the world, demonstrated remarkable intellectual development and artistic talent, particularly in music and singing, which delighted her foster parents. In contrast, Connor's fate took a much more dramatic turn. The violence he experienced in early childhood caused serious behavioral disorders that became apparent as early as primary school. The boys suffered from social maladjustment, exhibiting pathological withdrawal alternating with uncontrolled outbursts of aggression, primarily directed at girls. His behavioral patterns increasingly resembled those of his father. Despite his pleasant appearance, he was quite a cruel young man and wasn't ashamed to joke in his bloodthirsty manner. Connor enjoyed making jokes about death, and his cruel humor repeatedly shocked everyone around him. Because of this, classmates kept their distance from him, considering him an unpleasant and dangerous person. However, no one thought Connor was serious about killing children and animals. People around him assumed he simply had a peculiar dark sense of humor. Against this backdrop, the boy had practically no friends. This wasn't just due to his strange sense of humor and character. It turned out that he had been struggling with mental disorders for a long time, which frightened everyone. The boy was active on the internet, maintaining social media accounts where he wrote terrible things. In one of his posts during his school years, the teenager described his ailments in detail. Obviously, during that period, he was experiencing difficulties with socialization and understood what he was facing, but the illness proved stronger than Connor. He wrote that he suffered from bulimia, depression, anxiety, and attention deficit disorder. Naturally, he also had problems with academic performance. Some teachers claimed that the young man was mentally delayed and showed no interest in learning, often skipping classes. Unfortunately, no tests or analyses were conducted to confirm these suspicions. Therefore, Connor's exact diagnosis was never established. As a teenager, he was left alone to deal with both age-related and mental health problems. Connor complained that people didn't accept him, only looking at external manifestations. He didn't actually consider himself a bad person, but just wanted to cope with the consequences of his father's tyranny. The boy was convinced that his father was to blame for all these problems. Despite his desperate attempts to socialize, the young man couldn't find common ground even with his own sister, who was only a few years younger. The foster parents tried not to leave them alone together, knowing it could end in conflict and even physical fights. The children were kept separate from an early age, so their meetings and contacts would occur under adult supervision. But even under adult supervision, Connor would pick on his sister at the slightest provocation. Therefore, the foster parents sent them to different schools so they wouldn't cross paths during breaks. In high school, Connor was transferred to a specialized educational institution for teenagers suffering from social, emotional, and behavioral problems. During this period, Amber attended a regular school. As they grew older, the problems in the relationship between brother and sister only intensified. Connor, unable to establish romantic relationships due to his uncontrolled aggression that scared away potential partners, began systematically directing his accumulated anger toward Amber. His provocative behavior and constant attacks eventually created such an unbearable atmosphere that 14-year-old Amber, fearing for her own safety, was forced to insist on being transferred to a children's home. Connor remained with his foster parents until adulthood. In 2020, seeking independence, he joined the social project Deep Triangle in Hamilton, which provided housing for the homeless, essentially moving into a homeless shelter. Although the physical distance between the siblings somewhat reduced the frequency of conflicts, their meetings continued to be accompanied by tension. However, fate dealt Amber the most tragic blow in 2021, when she became a victim of sexual assault by 20-year-old Jamie Stars. The situation was particularly cynical because the attacker, previously charged with a similar crime, had been released on bail, which allowed him to commit a new crime. For this offense, Stars received a 10-year prison sentence. The traumatic experience deeply affected Amber's psychological state. In search of emotional support, she tried to rebuild connections with all close people, including her brother, who, however, showed complete indifference to her suffering. On November 26, 2021, while still in the children's home, Amber shared with her friend plans to meet with Connor. Despite their troubled past, she nursed hope that time had changed her brother, and they would be able to establish normal sibling relationships, leaving old conflicts behind. The meeting was initiated by Connor himself through the children's home administration. Despite her friend's warnings about potential danger given her brother's previous aggressive behavior, Amber agreed to meet. Her last public sign of life was a selfie with her brother on social media, where she appeared happy. Around midnight, Connor appeared at his dormitory, attracting the attention of an office employee with his eerie appearance. He was unkempt, with hands dirty up to the wrists, and exhibited strange behavior. Ignoring the concerned employee's question about his condition, he asked permission to make a phone call, explaining he wanted to ensure his sister, with whom he had allegedly quarreled, had safely returned to the children's home. The alarming phone call revealed that Amber had not returned for the night. Further checks through the foster parents also yielded no results. It was discovered that after their initial meeting at the foster parents' house, the teenagers had gone for a walk in the park for a private conversation, after which they went their separate ways, at least according to Connor. Police, having received the missing person report, determined that the version of the girl's voluntary departure was unlikely. She had no romantic relationships, and all her personal belongings remained in the dormitory. Particular suspicion was raised by Connor's behavior, who showed unnatural indifference to his sister's fate, showed no initiative in the search efforts, and didn't even contact the foster parents regarding the situation. Investigators, beginning their inquiry, naturally focused attention on the person who had last seen Amber. During questioning, Connor confirmed the fact of an evening walk with his sister. During interrogation, Connor presented a version of events full of contradictions. According to him, after another argument, he left his sister crying in the park. His story then took an illogical turn. He claimed he got lost in the neighborhood where he grew up and fell into some ditch, which he used to explain his dirty hands upon returning to the dormitory. Investigators' suspicions intensified when Connor, while precisely pointing out on the map the meeting places and walking routes with his sister, couldn't locate the mentioned ditch. When asked about possible witnesses who could confirm his alibi, the young man gave confused answers and avoided specifics. In the absence of direct evidence of his involvement in his sister's disappearance, investigators were forced to release him. The tragic conclusion came 48 hours after Amber's disappearance. On the morning of November 28, around 10:15, 40-year-old Stephen Corgan contacted emergency services with a shocking confession. He reported finding a girl's body in the park, confessing necrophilia with the found body, which he covered with branches after the act of violence. Police found the body 200 meters from the bridge, the last place where Amber was seen alive. The victim showed signs of brutal beating and sexual assault. Forensic examination confirmed the presence of Corrigan's DNA on various parts of the body, including intimate areas. He became the primary suspect not only in necrophilia but also in the murder. The examination ultimately confirmed that the found body belonged to 16-year-old Amber Gibson. The tragic news of Amber's death shook the local community. Connor publicly displayed his grief by posting an emotional message on social media about his beloved sister, expressing regret that the world never got to know her beautiful soul. Local residents, shocked by the brutal crime, created a spontaneous memorial in the park, bringing flowers to the site where the body was found. During this time, Connor took the initiative to give an interview to the local newspaper, wanting to tell his sister's story. However, the meeting with the journalists scheduled for December 2 never took place. By that time, Connor was already under arrest on suspicion of his sister's murder. The forensic examination revealed horrific details of the crime: 8 characteristic hemorrhages on the victim's neck indicating strangulation by hands, multiple blunt force trauma to the head resulting in intracranial hematoma, numerous fractures of facial and body bones. The nature of the injuries indicated a personal motive of the perpetrator. According to experts, the attacker first brutally beat Amber until she lost consciousness, then strangled her. The condition of the victim's clothing, particularly torn underwear, and signs of the body being dragged along the ground indicated sexual assault. A key moment in the investigation was establishing the time of death, 2 days before Stephen Corrigan's report. Corrigan's solid alibi at the time of the murder excluded his involvement in the killing itself, despite his confession to necrophilia. Investigators' suspicions about Connor's involvement were strengthened by his unnatural awareness of his sister's death. He posted about her death several hours before the official discovery of the body, which became compelling evidence of his involvement in the crime. The investigation of a missing girl took a new turn when law enforcement focused their attention on her brother Connor, who was the last person to see her alive. The girl's status as a missing person at that time prompted police to more thoroughly examine all circumstances of her disappearance. Investigators managed to reconstruct the victim's final hours thanks to the city's surveillance system. The footage recorded that at 21:51, Amber posted a selfie with her brother on social media, where she was radiating happiness. 6 minutes later, at 21:57, cameras captured them walking through the city and crossing a bridge near the park, the exact location where her body was later discovered. Approximately 90 minutes later, cameras recorded Connor returning along the same route, but without his sister's company. It's important to note that no other individuals were observed in the surveillance footage. Further monitoring of the suspect's actions led investigators to surveillance cameras near his dormitory. The footage captured Connor disposing of part of his clothing, throwing his jacket into a garbage container before entering the building, which raised serious suspicions among investigators. During the search of the containers, law enforcement officers found the jacket that the young man had been wearing on the fatal night. Notably, other elements of his attire remained untouched. According to investigators, this was explained by the simple lack of spare clothes and shoes due to the suspect's difficult financial situation. Forensic examination of the seized jacket and shoes revealed traces of soil and blood. Laboratory tests confirmed that the blood belonged to Amber, which became direct evidence of Connor's involvement in the crime. Attempts to clean the clothes of crime evidence proved insufficient, allowing forensic experts to obtain DNA samples. The forensic medical examination of the victim's body revealed blood on her underwear, which after analysis was identified as Connor's blood. Experts suggested these traces appeared due to hand injury during the victim's resistance. Additionally, the discovery of Connor's biological traces on his sister's body confirmed the fact of sexual violence, becoming irrefutable evidence of his involvement in the committed crime. While examining the suspect's mobile device, investigators discovered a strange sequence of messages. The day after the crime, around noon, Connor sent a message to a group chat of 5 participants requesting help in searching for his sister. 40 seconds later, he sent a private message to Amber inquiring about her well-being. Immediately afterward, he messaged the group again, claiming that his previous message was a failed joke and that help wasn't needed. Further analysis of browser history revealed searches about methods to avoid digital tracking and protect data from police investigation, indicating attempts to conceal traces of the crime. Examination of communications between the brother and sister revealed a horrifying backstory of their relationship. The messages revealed previous instances of sexual abuse by Connor and his threats of retaliation if his sister were to report to their foster parents or law enforcement. These circumstances had driven 14-year-old Amber to attempt leaving her foster family. Her silence was explained either by fear of her brother's threats or by complex emotional ties with him. However, shortly before the tragic event, the girl had likely decided to tell the truth to her foster parents, which could have become the motive for murder. Reconstruction of the fatal night's events showed that the meeting initially appeared peaceful. Cameras recorded their calm interaction during the walk. However, the situation changed dramatically after they entered the park. The investigation considered 2 versions: a spontaneous conflict provoked by Connor, or a premeditated crime where the meeting was a pretext to lure the victim to a secluded location. This meeting resulted in sexual assault and the girl's murder by strangulation. The perpetrator left his sister's body on the park's footpath, only slightly dragging it aside. On December 2, 2021, 18-year-old Connor Gibson was arrested. His detention occurred prior to a planned meeting with a journalist, where he intended to create an image of a grieving brother. He was charged with the rape and murder of his sister. Despite numerous direct pieces of evidence, including biological traces, video recordings, and digital evidence, the suspect continued to deny his involvement in the crime. However, the totality of collected evidence left no doubt about his guilt. Forensic examination revealed traces of Amber's blood on the suspect's clothes and shoes, and his genetic material was found on the victim's body and underwear. Surveillance systems recorded his presence near the crime scene, while the suspect failed to provide a convincing alibi. Investigators also examined his mobile phone's search history, where specific queries were discovered. His attempts to find information about concealing digital traces proved futile. After the young man's arrest, his foster parents revealed important details about his behavior. They had repeatedly expressed concerns about his socialization problems and the nature of his interactions with peers both at school and during his stay at the homeless shelter. Further investigation revealed disturbing aspects of Connor's personality, particularly his inclination toward destructive interests. His relationship with his sister, which appeared normal on the surface, actually concealed complex dynamics. Law enforcement included their correspondence and documentation about previous instances of sexual abuse in the case file. Investigators were particularly struck by Connor's reaction to the news of Amber's death. He displayed an unnatural indifference to the tragedy. Evidently, the suspect was convinced of the perfection of his attempts to mislead the investigation. Such behavior indicated a high level of intellectual development and possible mental disorders that distorted his perception of reality. The foster parents confirmed losing contact with Connor during the period when Amber's body had not yet been found. Despite the large-scale search operation and general community concern, he showed no interest in searching for his sister. The case shocked the public, especially after revealing the horrific details of the double violence against the victim. The realization that two dangerous criminals capable of violent acts had been present in society for an extended period caused mass shock. The prosecution built such a strong evidence base against Connor that the defense found itself in a difficult position. Lawyers unsuccessfully insisted on the absence of direct video evidence of the attack on the girl. They proposed a version suggesting that the brother was merely accompanying his sister on a walk, without criminal intentions. However, the presence of his genetic material on the victim's underwear and body remained without logical explanation. Although the crime scene was not equipped with surveillance cameras, making it impossible to record the attack itself, the totality of collected evidence convincingly established his guilt. The 13-day trial concluded with jury deliberations. The jury unanimously found Connor Gibson guilty of rape and murder of his 16-year-old sister. Considering the exceptional cruelty of the crime, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after serving 22 years. Next to face court was 38-year-old Stephen Corgan, who confessed to desecrating Amber Gibson's body after discovering it on the park path. During the court hearing, the defendant couldn't provide a rational explanation for his actions, only noting his inability to suppress sexual attraction to the victim's body. The prosecution spent considerable time determining the precise formulation of charges. Eventually, Corgan was charged with obstruction of justice. Forensic examination revealed his biological traces on 39 different areas of the deceased's body, which significantly complicated the investigation process. In defense of the accused came his father, 79-year-old retired Mr. Corgan. He categorically denied the possibility of his son committing such a crime, insisting on his integrity. According to the father's testimony, shortly before the incident, Stephen was at the family home, displaying completely balanced behavior. Additionally, a recent hand injury from a fall, in his father's opinion, physically prevented any manipulation of the victim's body. However, the presence of numerous biological traces of Stephen on the deceased's body remained without logical explanation. Clearly, a random encounter during a walk could not have led to such intensive physical contact. Importantly, Stephen had no prior acquaintance with Amber, and his DNA was transferred to the body after death had occurred. Stephen's ex-wife provided testimony to the court about his tendency toward violent behavior. According to her, she repeatedly experienced physical violence from him and constantly feared for her life, so her former husband's involvement in the crime didn't surprise her. The defendant's lawyer attempted to offer an alternative interpretation of events to mitigate his client's guilt. According to the attorney's version, Stephen, upon discovering the body, moved it into the bushes out of concern for potential passers-by. He then immediately reported the discovery to police. The attorney characterized necrophilia confession as a failed joke. However, this version failed to explain the presence of the defendant's biological traces all over the victim's body, including intimate areas, and the presence of semen. Such evidence clearly pointed to other motives behind the accused actions. Stephen Corgan was found guilty and sentenced to 9 years imprisonment. The most shocking aspect of this case was the betrayal by a family member. Children who had experienced parental cruelty and maternal indifference from an early age failed to find support in each other. They spent a significant part of their childhood in the state care system, separated due to Connor's aggressive behavior. Despite warnings from friends and obvious threats from her brother, Amber never gave up hope of restoring family ties. Her final decision to give her brother a chance at reconciliation tragically turned fatal. Throughout the trial, Connor displayed complete emotional detachment, raising serious questions about his mental state. Evidently, existing mental disorders played a decisive role in committing the crime. Being older than Amber, he had spent more time under the influence of the toxic family environment and parental aggression that affected the entire family. The defense emphasized Connor's numerous attempts to seek help, evidenced by his social media posts where he openly described his problems and attempts to overcome them. However, his calls for help remained without proper attention. Amber's biological grandparents, who were previously denied custody of their grandchildren, placed indirect responsibility on the foster parents for insufficient attention to troubled children. They claimed that the motivation for adoption was exclusively state assistance, after receiving which the foster parents lost interest in parenting. The elder relatives expressed concerns about the safety of other foster children in this family. The foster parents categorically denied these accusations, insisting on their maximum efforts in supporting troubled children, although they acknowledged the complexity of this process. The decision to transfer Amber to a children's home was made for her safety, to separate her from her brother. The foster parents denied any knowledge of previous instances of violence. After reaching adulthood, Connor independently decided to move to a homeless shelter, and it was impossible to dissuade him. For a certain period, the brother and sister tried to maintain normal relations, which was encouraged by the foster parents. Unfortunately, no one could have predicted the tragic turn of events. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, friends.